Good morning, everyone. It is March 17th, 2018, America. I'm here at the Free Thought Project. Never forget, 50 years ago, the U.S. slaughtered 500 unarmed men, women, and children. "50 years ago today, and one of the most heinous and grisly acts against civilians during wartime, as many as 500 unarmed men, women, children, and the elderly, nearly the entire population of the South Vietnamese hamlet of My Lai were slaughtered, raped, and brutally tortured by United States troops. As the U.S. military continues to deploy boots on the ground in additional nations, and as specters of totalitarianism and even greater militarism materialize as if pulled from a century ago, the lessons of My Lai should not be relegated to history's dustbin. History, after all, doesn't repeat itself. Ill-fated actions are carried out like deja vu by those who refuse to examine past mistakes as if they are sleepwalking through life. The My Lai hamlet, part of the village Sun Mai, was located in Quang Nay province, which was believed to be a stronghold of the National Liberation Front, or Viet Cong, and was frequently a target of the United States and South Vietnamese bombing attacks. History.com explains, in March of 1968, Charlie Company of the American Divisions of 11th Infantry Brigade received word that Viet Cong guerrillas had taken control of Sun Mai, led by Lieutenant William L. Cowley. The unit was sent to the village on a search and destroy mission on March 16th. Officials told C Company villagers had been informed they must evacuate by 7 a.m. on March 16th, meaning soldiers would assume anyone they encountered should be considered enemy Viet Cong or sympathizers. After an air assault was completed, Charlie Company, fully expected to clash with VC fighters, burst into the village, spraying gunfire indiscriminately, but it quickly became apparent no militants were present, and women and children the soldiers found insisted no enemy forces remained in My Lai. But that didn't stop the dejected troops of C Company, who had only recently been reduced in number to around 100 men, from carrying out one of the most abominable wartime massacres of civilians in modern times. At Cowley's command, the troops rounded up the unarmed residents and proceeded to burn the village. Soldiers dragged the innocent into ditches and shot whole groups with machine guns, while others raped, pillaged, and brutalized the community. The three death sites were about 200 yards apart. One survivor of the massacre said of the scene that day for a November 17th, 1969 New York Times report, "When the houses had been cleared, the troops dynamited those made of brick and set fire to the wooden structures. They did not speak to the villagers and were not accompanied by an interpreter who could have explained their actions. Then the Vietnamese were gunned down where they stood. About 20 soldiers performed the executions at each of the three places, using their individual weapons, presumably the M16 rifles. This is what happens to unarmed people." According to Ameriforce Media, Lieutenant Cowley gave explicit orders to kill and participated in the execution of unarmed villagers standing in groups and lying in ditches. There were also accounts of soldiers mutilating bodies and raping young women. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson watched the massacre from his helicopter. Realizing that civilians were being killed, he landed his helicopter near one of the ditches and rescued some survivors. Thompson later told a congressional panel that he had only witnessed a single armed draft-age male seen fleeing the village shortly after troops arrived throughout the entire day, even though he flew repeated passes over the area once the shooting began. From his bird's-eye view, Thompson and his men began to realize the only bodies on the ground and there were bodies everywhere were infants, children, women, elderly villagers, and some men. But none of those men who had been slaughtered were of fighting age. Hawaii Reporter recounted, "Around mid-morning, Thompson and his crew watched in horror as an American Army officer walked up to an injured Vietnamese girl, flipped her over his foot, and shot her dead." In a 1998 Associated Press interview, the pilot recalled seeing dead bodies piled in ditches with soldiers approaching everywhere, and felt he could not sit idly by. "These people were looking at me for help, and there was no way I could turn my back on them," he inserted. After landing the helicopter amid the carnage, Thompson threatened to shoot any troops who continued attacking the retreating villagers. The heroic humanitarian most effectively ended the barbarous massacre at My Lai. U.S. officials immediately moved to hide the disgraceful bloodbath from the public it knew would be appalled enough to demand an end to the war, and it wasn't until a year later the gory details of the officially sanctioned military assault began to trickle out, thanks again to the actions of a single man. Ronald Ridenour, a former soldier, caught wind of the gruesome event at My Lai from other soldiers and began writing letters to political leaders in Washington, D.C., demanding answers and more information. When Ridenour failed to receive responses from President Richard Nixon, the Pentagon, Joint Chiefs of Staff, several congressmen, and the State Department, he turned to award-winning journalist Seymour Hersh for an interview, and the story finally broke in November of 1969. A fierce backlash quickly and rightly ensued. And of course, these outrages are no longer there. Amid the international uproar that followed Ridenour's revelations, the U.S. Army ordered a special investigation into the My Lai massacre and subsequent efforts to cover up. The inquiry, headed by Lieutenant General William Pierce, released its report in March of 1970 and recommended that no fewer than 20 officers be discharged for their involvement in covering up the massacre. The Army would later charge only 14, including Cali, Captain Ernst Medina, and Colonel Orrin Henderson, with crimes related to the event at My Lai. All were acquitted except for Cali, who was found guilty of premeditated murder for ordering the shootings, despite his contention that he was only following orders from his commanding officer, Captain Medina. In March of 1971, Cali was given life sentence for his role in directing the killing at My Lai. Many saw Cali as a scapegoat, and his sentence was reduced upon appeal to 20 years and later to 10. And he was paroled in 1974, so he served a very, very short period of time. But this is the kind of thing our military and government does. It kills innocent people. And don't think for a minute that they'd have any problem whatsoever killing you, killing your children, killing everyone you love. I think the Waco incident pretty much proves that. I think the Ruby Ridge incident pretty much proves that. I think that the slaughter of American citizens by law enforcement on a daily basis proves this. Now, I'm looking on this website called stopthecrime.net, and it has lots of interesting documents on it. I'm looking for one in particular. When I find it, I'm going to cover it. It's all about and it's written by the ruling people, the ruling class. So, and you're going to see just what they do to us and what they have in store for us. And it's all coming true, all of it. So I guess I'll be talking to you all later. Until next time, kill the state and live free.